1944, my grandmother put me in the dress, told me how cute I was. Affirmation is mind-altering.
Why was she doing that to you?
At that time, there were no words. I didn't even understand there were other people until Christine Jorgensen hit the news in the mid-50s. Army soldier becomes transsexual. So I thought, oh, there's the word.
So that becomes an identity you become aware of.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's who I am. But there's no other voice saying, no, you're not. I decided to go see a gender specialist.
Sounds like he was excited to have a candidate that he could run his project on.
Yeah, I trashed it all with one ridiculous mistake of allowing somebody to carve me up like a piece of sushi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Lila Rose Show. I'm sitting down today with Walt Heyer, who is the, in some ways, original outspoken detransitioner. He is also someone who has offered free of charge support and counsel to thousands of other individuals who themselves have struggled with what the culture is calling gender dysphoria. In this conversation, Walt shares some really incredible insights. He debunks some of the myths around the transgender issue. He talks about what parents should do if their child may be struggling with what they think is gender dysphoria, and so much more. You're not going to want to miss this episode. This episode that you're about to watch also has special bonus content that you can go check out at rosereport.supercast.com. There's exclusive behind the scenes content for people that are supporting this amazing community that we're building over at the show. So go check it out at rosereport.supercast.com. And thank you so much to you guys who are already supporting the Rose Report and supporting the show. It means the world to me. And I'll see you over at Rose Report. Walt Heyer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. It's really an honor to get you coming in studio. I know all the way from North Carolina. Yeah. How was the flight?
Yeah, it was great, actually. So
good.
We're here.
In today's world, you know, having a great flight is a rarity. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I first saw you, I think I was telling you earlier, over a decade, maybe a decade and a half ago. I first saw your story. I think I went to your website and I was blown away. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, you know, it was around the time that I had first I saw a child actually at a restaurant who was basically being transgender. This was a decade and a half ago. A little boy dressed up as a girl by two men. One of them was a cross-dressing man cross-dressing as a woman. Yeah. And I remember Googling this afterwards because my heart was just torn up about this poor child. And I Googled it. They said, oh, there's 17,000 or, you know, several tens of thousands of trans children. Mm-hmm. Now we're in a situation where this has kind of seized the country and really the West by storm. Increasingly, young people think that they're transgender. So your voice, your story on this predates the modern, you know, the last decade. You've been a prophetic voice in the wilderness on this topic now for a decade and a half or two, almost 2 decades. Yeah, definitely. And my journey actually started in 1944, 80 years ago. Tell me about the beginning of your journey. Yeah, in 1944, my grandmother was my babysitter, and she was making women's clothing, and I used to just sit with my arms on her sewing machine watching what she was doing. 4 years old, what do I know? And I was very curious about it, so she decided to make me a purple chiffon dress. And she put me in the dress, told me how cute I was, and we're off and running. You know, this is that whole thing where you begin to wonder about who you are. You know, when somebody starts affirming you, affirmation is mind-altering. And so her affirmation toward me had me confused about who I was. And so she told me, this is a secret, don't tell your parents. And so this went on for about 2.5 years. So you can imagine you got a 2.5 year indoctrination into this. At that time, there were no words, right? They hadn't even come up with the word transgender that they use and all this stuff. I was just a boy cross-dressing, but I was being affected by it to the point to where I got so used to the affirmation that I wanted to wear the women's clothing because it was making me feel like I had some sense of value. And your parents had no clue that this was happening? No. And how is that? How didn't they know? Well, because I was at Grandma's house, and my parents were off camping and fishing, and they'd come home on the weekend and take me home, but the dress never came up until about 2.5 years in. I decided I got so accustomed to wearing the dress, I snuck it in a brown paper bag in the car and took it home, put it in my bottom dresser drawer so I could experience the cross-dressing when I was home. Well, my mom found the dress, and boom, that
that game was over.
How old were you at this time, Walt?
About 6.5.
The cross-dressing that your relative was doing of you happened for a 2.5-year period, starting at around 4.
Mm-hmm.
And did you, how many hours would you be at your
weekend
grandma's house?
Yeah, they'd drop me off Friday night and pick me up Sunday afternoon.
And why was she doing that to you?
I think she just thought it was benign. She thought it was fun. I wasn't complaining because I had no method for complaining. I didn't know the difference, right? I mean, what is a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid? And they don't know anything. They don't even know what they want for breakfast, let alone, about wearing a dress and the effects it's going to have on the psyche. This is child abuse. Let that sink in. It's emotional and psychological child abuse for anybody to cross-dress a boy or cross-dress a girl and tell them they can become somebody else or infer that they can or suggest they can or play that they can. This is damaging to the brain. And it alters the brain at the level of where our identities are being formed and people don't ever get the proper effective treatment they need to rewrite the wrongs that were done by a parent or a relative or sometimes even a sibling. Sometimes older siblings are cross-dressing their younger siblings.
Can one instance of cross-dressing leave a wound, or would you say it has to be?
I doubt that.
Okay.
I doubt that. I think it has to be repeated, and I think it has to be kind of flourishing where everybody in the family's involved, and you've got this going on, and so there you are. So, I don't think one incident is going to do it.
But you were doing this weekends upon weekends at Grandma's house. Your mother finds the dress in a paper bag.
Right.
How did she respond?
Well, she said, "Where'd this come from?" And I said, "Well, Grandma made it." And so she was very angry. And then when my dad heard that, he exploded and he went totally berserk about what she was doing to his boy. And so I was never allowed to go back to Grandma's house unless the whole family was there. And so even the fact that she told me to keep it a secret, and the secret was now out, I felt responsible for breaking the secret, like I had done something wrong. So you see, there's another layer of shame and guilt and stuff that went on. And so, and I'm causing my parents to fight. That was on me, as a kid, 6.5 years old. I'm the one causing this discord in the house. And so there's all of a sudden you've taken on a responsibility as a young child that's not your responsibility, but that's how it feels. And you feel terrible. And I was crying myself to sleep and like, who am I? What am I doing?
At 6.5 years old.
At 6.5 years old.
Walt, I got to ask, I know we were touching on it earlier, but I think it's a big question because it's happening a lot. There's a lot of moms today. I know one through a friend of a friend that are transing their kids or thinking their son is a girl. Their son says he's a girl, so they're dressing them as a girl. And the dads are involved and maybe okay with it. But is there some women that really, it becomes this agenda for them to do this? They think they're doing their child a favor. It sounds like your grandmother really, it was more than a game for her. She did it every time you came over, it sounds like. I can't get into her head on it, so I don't know. She drank a lot. And she seemed to gain some enjoyment out of it. But let me be clear. No parent should ever cross-dress their kid and affirm them and be, as you say, a mom transing their kid. Then the mom actually should be taken out of the home and given counseling because the kid is being destroyed by mom. Why do you think, if you can share, and if it's okay if you don't have a hypothesis on this, why do you think, maybe you can't get in your grandma's head, but why do you think some women, it seems to be a trend today, almost, it's happening more than it's ever happened before, want to do this, want to support their very young child, sometimes their 2-year-old, in cross-dressing? Yeah,
because if they bring this up in a conversation among other people, then they can tell you they're smarter than you are because they have a trans kid and they're much more open to things and they are psychologically helping their child. And the opposite is true. Mom is nuts and they're destroying their kid. And it's so hideous It's institutionalized child abuse.
Easter is a season to celebrate Jesus Christ's resurrection and go deeper into our faith. That's why I'm a big fan of Hallow app, which is the #1 prayer app in the world. They have a whole series dedicated to helping you go deeper into your faith this Easter season. And they're doing a special on Jacques Philippe's Interior Freedom. This is a spiritual classic that I love and have been benefited by over the years to help us deepen our relationship with God and our freedom as God's sons and daughters. Hallow app also has thousands of prayers, meditations, sleep stories, and even worship music. Some of the content is for kids. A lot of it is for adults. Really, anybody and everyone in the family will find something for them that they can do even on a daily basis on the Hallow app. So during this Easter season, I hope you deepen your prayer life and make use of the amazing tool that Hallow is, the #1 prayer app in the world. And you can try the Hallow app risk-free and completely free for a full 3 months at hallow.com/Lila. That's hallow.com/Lila. What happened after your parents found out? Now you go to grandmother only on supervised visits.
Yeah.
What happened next in your life?
Yeah, well, my dad obviously was, he was a Los Angeles auxiliary policeman. He was a judo expert. He was an industrial salesman, strong guy, great guy. He decided that he was going to knock the dress out of me with heavy discipline. And so he was he was laying on some pretty hard discipline with a hardwood floor plank when I did anything wrong. He was really trying to do like a blacksmith would do to iron that you put in the furnace and then put it on an anvil and then shape it. He was trying to unshape the damage that Grandma did. He was only causing more damage because it was such severe discipline. But the kicker was his adopted brother, Uncle Fred, found out about the purple dress. Uncle Fred was in his teens at the time, and he began when I was about 8 years old sexually molesting me because of the dress. So here's the instruction here for people to listen to is that because of the dress, I was sexually molested. Because of the dress, I was hit with a hardwood floor plank. Because of the dress, I started to wonder who I was. Let that sink in. I think people need to get their head around the fact that, be clear, there is nobody in all of world history that's ever changed their gender. You can't do it. You can change your persona. You can change what you look like. Your biological gender is formed in the womb 9 months before you're born between the egg and the sperm. That's where it starts. And it's not changeable. Why does anyone, I can't, for the life of me, cannot understand how people can even think for a moment that somebody's gender can be changed. It can't happen. That part is insane.
When your uncle, your teenage uncle, was doing this to you, abusing you, was it kind of a thing of mockery because the word was out that little Walt was dressing up in a dress? Can you share more about that?
I just think for him, it was, who knows, but probably just seemed like I was fair game. And so when I told my dad what he was doing, told my mom what he was doing, they said, well, Fred would never do that. So they never believed me.
I'm so sorry, Walt.
Yeah. And so they went to him and he said, no, I didn't do it. Of course, he's not going to say he did. So then the trust issue came in because there was no sense in me trying to share anything with anybody because they weren't going to believe me. So why would I even spend the time and energy trying to share with them something that was happening that was harmful to me? Because they wouldn't believe me anyway.
Was that abuse recurring?
It was, yeah.
And what was your kind of feelings deep inside at this time when you felt you couldn't talk to your parents, you're being abused, you have this maybe desire still to, did you have a desire still to cross-dress? I mean, what was the innermost part of Walt like at that time? Yeah,
I think what happens is your feelings go numb and you don't want to be who you are. You don't want to be the person who's been cross-dressed, hit with a hardwood floor plank, and sexually abused. You want to be somebody else. I didn't want to be the person that was collecting all this stuff before I was 10 years old. So where do you go with that?
Was there anyone you felt safe with growing up?
No.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I found that I just had to navigate this stuff on my own. And I didn't even really begin to understand there were other people until Christine Jorgensen hit the news in the mid-50s, early, I think 53, 54, somewhere in there, made the headlines, Marine or Army soldier, whatever it was, becomes transsexual. And so I thought, oh, there's the word, right?
How old were you?
I would have been, about 14, 12 to 14.
So that becomes an identity you become aware of. Transsexual is an identity.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's who I am, right? So that then the message to me is that, yeah, maybe that's who I am. But there's no other voice saying, no, you're not, right? So you only have this one channel that you're going down, this one lane you're following. But, the pain, I think there's something called adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences cause trauma, and trauma needs to be treated by a trauma therapist. I had suffered a great deal of trauma, and I never had any effective sound therapy about it. I was dealing with this on my own. And if you don't get trauma taken care of, it's going to manifest itself in some way. And that's what happened. It manifested itself in a negative way that ended up what we'll talk about as we go on here.
So what happens? You're 14. You hear about transsexual as an identity for the first time. You're already struggling.
Yeah.
Was the abuse still ongoing at this point, or
No,
had it
no.
tapered
The
off?
abuse had stopped by the time I was 10 years old. But about that time, I decided to take on this secret identity I didn't share with anybody called Crystal West. And it was just my way of sort of coping. And because I felt like I had a radio in my head that just played, there's something wrong with you, you're not right, or you're a female, you're this. And so I was battling. On the outside, I was purely male, young, small boy, not strong, not like a lot of guys that were big, muscular. I was small, and not very big today, but so that played a part in it. And so but taking on Crystal West was just sort of a way for me to have a way to vent or a way to cope with the stress. And so maybe it was a way of dissociation from who I was, not wanting to be the person being abused. I could take on this identity that was not getting abused, because Crystal West never got cross-dressed by anybody, never got hit by anybody, and was never molested by anybody. That was the safe person in my life.
Why the name Crystal West?
I don't know. I just one afternoon came up with it. It wasn't too creative.
When did you first tell someone about Crystal West?
I don't remember telling anybody about it. Yeah.
So it was like a secret life.
Yeah.
So when you hit puberty, how did you handle that?
Yeah, I had a girlfriend. I was never had any homosexual feeling. That was never an issue with me. I just had a broken identity. And so I had a girlfriend. The first one, I think I was in grammar school when I had a girlfriend. And then all through life, I had girlfriends. And so Lola Joy Phipps, is that a cool name? And so she was a redhead, cool. Mm-hmm. And, so I was, on the outside, looked very normal. Mm. If you went around and listened to me, you'd think, oh, he's a normal kid, right? Struggled academically because I had so much confusion. But I looked real normal. I had good boyfriends, girlfriends. I was in groups of guys that were in sports, cars, all that sort of stuff. I did all the right stuff. I was on track. I played what they call B football at Eagle Rock High School. So I looked real normal.
If someone had asked you at that time, Walt, are you doing okay? Is something hurting you inside? Do you think they're like, I'm fine? Like,
I would have said, yeah, because I didn't want to let anybody in. It's like, if you go back to the time when I told my parents what would happen and what a big failure that was, I couldn't take that risk again. That shut down right there. I couldn't tell anybody. If my parents weren't willing to listen to me, then nobody in the world is willing to listen to me.
As you know, Mother's Day is around the corner, and I love finding the most thoughtful gifts for my mom, who deserves the world and more, for her special day. Cozy Earth has got your mom covered. Their ultra-soft, breathable bamboo bedding and pajamas are the perfect gift, comfort that feels like home. I personally love my Cozy Earth bamboo pajamas. They're incredibly soft, they keep me cool at night, and they're high quality so I can wear them again and again. And right now, Cozy Earth is offering something very special. From May 2nd through May 4th, you can buy one, get one free on their bamboo pajamas with my code Lila, BOGO. Go to CozyEarth.com and use the code Lila, BOGO to get pajamas. Buy one, get one free. Or to enjoy their sheets, robes, loungewear, or any other product, go to CozyEarth.com, and anytime you can take 40% off your order using the code Lila. Did you later on end up reconciling? Well, they would need to reconcile with you and apologize for not believing you. Did you end up having that conversation later on with your parents?
No, my father passed away when I was 20, and my mom was actually an abuser, abused me, and in her entire life, to my knowledge, never told me she loved me. She really didn't want to have me. I think that was part of the problem. Early 40s, where the war was going on, they were financially struggling. And she was kind of an angry teenage girl that my brother came before me. So she was only 18 when she had my brother, and so 20 when she had me. So I think there was just too many things coming at her with the war, money. Yeah.
And when you say she never said she loved you, she never said those words ever, or really? Mm-hmm. Is that partly a generational thing? You think the family she came from, they never said it? Did you ever?
I think she grew up and she had her own tough life.
Yeah.
And so I look at where she came from and go, yeah, I can get that. Probably nobody ever told her they loved her. Mm. So she never experienced that, so she never needed to pass it on.
When you graduate high school, what happens next?
Yeah, I graduated from high school. I went to Pasadena City College and started studying electronic drafting. I went to work for Libroscope in Burbank, California, and worked on the Polaris missile system. I was
very cool,
very determined to get into this new age of rockets and stuff. And so I was doing electronic drawings, and I became what they called a design engineer, which was I started out on the drafting table, but I worked up to where I was a design engineer on the Apollo space missions.
Wow, very cool.
I worked on Apollo 1 in the area of cryogenics.
Wow.
And working on the connectors and help form the NASA specifications for cryogenic connectors in a small group of people. I went from there to the automotive industry, where I worked for American Automotive Company. I became the national operations manager at Honda later on in my automotive career. So I had a great career, but I was struggling with all these things that happened. And by the time I got to Honda, I was coping with using alcohol, and then eventually started using cocaine, because nothing could kill the pain of the purple dress, being physically abused and being sexually abused. Mm-hmm. So I was using my own therapy, which was drugs and alcohol, to try to numb the pain that was never resolved.
Did you get married?
I got married at 1962, so I would have been 22. First child came when I was 24. Next one came at 28.
Did she know about your first wife? Did she know about anything
I told
that was
her
going on?
Right out front.
So she knew about the abuse, the purple dress. She knew.
She didn't know about that part. I just told her I was struggling. Still didn't know what to tell people, except I told her I was struggling with this. I didn't know where it went, and we both kind of blew it off, going, once you get married and have kids, you got a job, everything's cool. Did
you have a temptation to want to cross-dress during that time?
Yeah, that feeling really never went away. But I think this is the thing that's hardest to explain, is when you've been abused and you've suffered a great deal of trauma, you're trying to find ways to escape it. And if we can just stop and kind of look at somebody trying to use a different identity as a way to escape the pain that the other person felt. And that there's two containers. One was badly abused, the other was not.
So at what point did you, that first kind of inkling when you were 14, you heard that term transsexual for the first time. Now you're married, you have 2 kids, your career's going really, really well. You're working on very interesting things. You've kind of American dream, you've arrived despite all these childhood traumas, but deep down you're still struggling.
Yeah, see, and that's where the struggle really, I held it at bay, but I had to start using alcohol, I felt like, to numb the pain, and I used more and I used more. The marriage started struggling. My job wasn't struggling as much as the marriage was struggling. I was drinking on the way home. I was not reliable. If I drank all night, I still got up and went to work the next day. I always was at work. I never missed a day of work. I was always steady on. The money would come into the house. But I couldn't fix all the stuff that had been broken early in my life.
At what point did you think, I want to come out publicly as a... At what point did it kind of cross your mind that that was an option and you felt like that would cure the pain?
Yeah,
of what you felt deep inside?
Going public didn't really happen until I decided to go see a gender specialist, which, by the way, don't ever go to a gender specialist because they only have one thing in mind, changing your gender. And they're not there to help you. They're there to destroy your life.
And were you still married at this point?
I was married.
So did she know you were going to a gender specialist?
I didn't tell her. I thought, man, I can solve this on my own. I'll go in and find out what's going on.
Because in your mind, did you think, oh, this transsexual thing is why I'm drinking so much?
Yeah.
And you thought, that's ruining my career, it's ruining my marriage. Got to fix that. Going to go quietly to this counselor, going to solve it. Is that kind of where your head was
Spot
at?
on. But then he said you had gender dysphoria. Now, keep in mind, gender dysphoria didn't even become a diagnosis until 2013. This was in 1981. He said I had gender dysphoria. This was the therapist, Dr. Paul Walker, who wrote the standards of care that are in existence today. This guy was the world-leading gender therapist who was my director of therapy.
How did you find him?
He was in San Francisco, and I asked people, around, and they said, this guy is the number one guy. This is who you got to see.
And that's where you guys were living at the time?
Yeah, we were living in Sonoma.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
it's
in Sonoma.
Area.
So I went to his Union Street office, drunk, and went in there, and he diagnosed me while I was intoxicated with gender dysphoria.
Was this on a weekend? What was?
It was I don't remember what day it was. And then he said, come back next week. And I went back the next week, and he had the letter of approval already written for me to have surgery. He says, you're a candidate for hormones and surgery.
Sounds like he was excited.
Yeah.
To have a candidate that he could run his project on. Yeah.
So I got the letter, and then I went back, and that's when I talked to my wife about it. And so then, obviously the marriage within 2 years totally collapsed, and we got divorced. And then
how did you, if you don't mind me asking, how did your wife respond when for the first time you show up with this letter and it's from a counselor who's saying you're going to get a surgery? And what was the surgery that was being recommended?
Yeah, gender reassignment surgery is what they called it in those days. Sex change surgery.
That includes castration, right?
Yeah.
And so you're giving your wife a letter saying this.
Well, I didn't give her the letter. I just told her what he said, and she's, I don't think she was surprised because she knew I was struggling. She knew I was coming home drunk. She knew I'd had trouble. I don't think she knew to the degree of how much the depth of the struggle was. But I think in many ways she was relieved. Because she probably started to see maybe the light at the end of the tunnel. We can dissolve the marriage, because I'd been out of the house, in the house, out of the house, living in an apartment, back. So it was chaotic. So I think for her, it was kind of a relief. And then she quickly got an attorney and had me sign divorce papers. And so we were divorced in early 1983. In January, I believe it was, maybe February, I had the quote, sex change surgery in April.
April.
Is this April?
We're in April. How many years ago was that?
1983.
Wow. What is that? Are we at
42,
40 years now?
Over 40 years.
Over
42
40
years.
years now. Wow.
Yeah, so that was a long time ago. But the surgeon who, Dr. Biber, who did my surgery, had already performed over 3,000 of them. in 1983.
EveryLife.com is America's pro-life baby diaper and wipes company. I love EveryLife.com, and I use EveryLife diapers and wipes for my little ones because these are a best-in-class product that are clean. There's no harmful dyes or fragrances or phthalates in this product. It is designed to be healthy for your little one and good for your little one's skin. If you go to EveryLife.com/join today, by joining the Changing Lives Club, you not only get 10% off your monthly diaper and wipes subscription, in addition to that, you'll get a free tote bag, and EveryLife.com will donate a box of diapers and wipes to a mother and baby in need. And I'm excited to share, EveryLife.com is now offering training pants for your little one. These are 12-hour leak-proof training pants, pull-ups for that little one that is maybe potty training. You got to check them out. EveryLife also has just come out with their new shampoo and baby wash and lotion package. The product is amazing. I have already started to use it. That's EveryLife.com/join. Use the code Lila. And for the sake of clarity here, if whatever you're willing to share, Walt, and I so appreciate you just, this is a huge part of your ministry today, is you just share the truth about what you experienced. When we talk about sex change surgeries, I think there's a little bit of a desensitization around what this actually means.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about a doctor who in San Francisco, he was in San Francisco, right?
The surgeon was actually in Trinidad, Colorado.
Oh, the surgeon was in Trinidad, but he was referred by the San Francisco doctor you had mentioned. So it's in Colorado. He's done already 3,000 of these surgeries. Are these men and women?
All men.
All men. And so what do? They do a castration. Can you share us just briefly what this sex change surgery actually means?
Yeah.
Because to what you were saying, you can't change your sex.
Yeah. It's important for people to realize they don't remove the penis. Mm-hmm. It remains there. They just invert it. So they're using all the same parts you always had. They're just trying to redefine them. It's mutilating people. It's barbaric. It dehumanizes who you are. And it destroys your ability to function the way God made you to function. Dehumanizing and actually so destructive.
When you were preparing to go in for that surgery, how did you feel?
Well, the first time when I went to Trinidad, Colorado, I'd gone and signed into the hospital, sat in the waiting room to go in for the surgery, and I left the hospital, got on the bus, flew back home, admitted to my wife that I was at the place to have surgery, and said, I'm not going to do it. I really need to get my life back together and not get this going. And
were you still married at this point?
Yeah.
And were you trying to make it work, the marriage
I was trying to make it work, but...
how did she respond to that?
I think she was skeptical, but she was willing to try. But I think here's the thing, that when anybody has suffered extensive childhood trauma, we need to be really clear about how deep and how long and how much therapy that person needs to get right with themselves. And it's not an easy fix. And there's a lot that needs to be dealt with emotionally and psychologically. And so I want people to understand, if you've suffered any kind of sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse, you need a trauma therapist. You don't need a gender therapist. And you need to commit for long-term therapy, depending on the extent of what's going on in your life.
And you would eventually get that therapy later.
I would after going through. Yeah, after the fact. Yeah, after being, completely tore up and ripped up. And, I was never suicidal until after I had the surgery. I attempted suicide twice.
Let's go back to that time if we can. And I meant to ask something earlier. I'd like to ask you now if it's okay. Was faith a part of your childhood? Was it a part of your marriage? How did you see God during all of this time?
Yeah, I think, I went to church from the time I was 7 years old. And so I think, there's a lot of us that go to church, and we think we're connecting, but we're just going through the motions, and we're saying the words, we're reading, singing the songs, but we really haven't connected with the Lord and given our life to the Lord. That's a whole different scope of things, isn't it? And so throughout my marriage, we went to church. We went to Forest Home Christian Conference Center in the mountains as a family. My kids accepted Jesus. And so we're a family of faith. But again, I go back and say, this happens to people of faith.
Yep.
Because they've been damaged. And because they're not looking directly into the eyes of Jesus Christ, they're looking into the eyes of a gender therapist. Jesus is going to help you. The gender therapist is going to ruin you.
I think also there's more awareness and resources than maybe there were, 30, 40, 50 years ago. This was, of course, 30 to 40 years ago when you were going back to your wife after that first, flying to Colorado for the surgery. You just said, I'm not going to do this. You left. Was your faith a part of that decision? Like you wanted to have this life of, a faithful husband, a good wife, kids. Is that what you was at war with inside of you at the time?
The one thing I had this picture, I can picture it today. I had a picture of myself in a cabin at the edge of a lake, staying married to one woman, nice kids, taking care of the family, being responsible. And I trashed it all with one stupid, ridiculous mistake of allowing somebody to carve me up like a piece of sushi.
So you went back.
So
you went back to Colorado.
Yeah,
for that surgery.
About a year and a half later, And so I was just too badly damaged. And that's what I see in the people I work with. The damage is too extensive. And we don't go to the right people to get help with. We go to the wrong people. And so that's why I keep coming back to it. Don't go to a gender therapist. They only have one thing in mind. And it is not to help you.
After you went back to the Colorado, you went for that surgery. Was the marriage at this point over, or was it? Yeah,
it was. Yeah.
So you done an absolution or a dissolution at this point?
Yeah, we knew it was over. Okay. I think there was just it was a terrible time because the level of pain from the childhood and then seeing your career collapse, you're going through this stuff. Because after I had the surgery, I was terminated from my great job immediately. And
why?
Because of what I did.
Did you show up to work dressed as a woman?
No, I just told them I was doing it, and they gave me a box, said, put your stuff in it. We're eliminating your job. See, they didn't want to fire me. They said, we've decided to eliminate your position in the company. So that means we don't need you. Clever way of terminating you. So within a few weeks, I was homeless and living in a park in Long Beach, California, in a pile of vomit.
What did you think when you went in for that surgery? Not the first time when you left, but the second time when you actually went through with it. What did you think was going to happen afterwards? Were you hopeful that your life was going to change for the better? You must have been hopeful.
I think I was still trying to get rid of the pain. Because no one was telling me there was an alternative about how to get rid of the pain. Being sexually abused, being physically abused, being emotionally abused. My mom admitted to my wife today, not today, but I mean the wife I have today, but she admitted before she died that she almost killed me. And I knew that there was something that happened between us, but she...
when you were what age?
Around 2.
Did she try to kill you, or you?
She just gets so angry that she shook me so hard that she is shaking syndrome. She just lost it, and I remember things like that. And I even confronted her about it one time, and she said it didn't happen. But before she died, she admitted that it did.
So when you got that sex change surgery, you thought, this is finally going to resolve this pain inside of me because now I'm going to be Crystal. I mean, did you assume a name?
Laura Jensen is the name.
Laura Jensen.
And so,
because now Laura Jensen, she's a new person. This Walt history is not hers.
Right.
That kid is not. This is the real person, Laura, and she doesn't have the baggage.
Yeah. Which is a total crock because you're still the same person. You just changed the cover. It's like changing the cover on a book. The writing inside's still the same. And so we're trying to mask the truth trying to cover up the truth. We're not being honest with ourselves. And so I lived the life for 8 years. But during those 8 years, I worked for the FDIC. I got federal jobs. I worked at the post office. There was never a time when I wasn't struggling, though. And I think it's instructive for us to understand I was still struggling because I'd never dealt with being physically abused, emotionally abused, and psychologically abused. And so when you don't resolve those things, and by the way, if you do resolve them, you'll never want to have hormones and surgery.
Did you feel any short-term relief after the sex change surgery?
Yeah, probably for about 72 hours.
Like a high?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I'm different now.
Yeah.
Was it physically painful?
Yeah, to some degree, but I think it was, the whole thing for me was all psychological and emotional. And it's just a sad tale when you're trying to erase who you are and try to become someone you can never become. And that's all it is.
Well, besides the sex change surgery, what are some of the other things that you did around that time to achieve transition?
Yeah.
And what were you doing in that 8-year period to try to really be that Laura?
Yeah.
I
had face peels. I had all kinds of other chin implants and nose surgeries. And I did all these crazy things. Sad to say. Again, I didn't want to be the person who had been abused.
Yep.
And so we can't recreate ourselves. And hormones are not effective in changing your gender. Having all the same body parts reversed and changed around doesn't change who you are. You still have all your same parts. They just rearrange them and put them in a different place. So the reality of this is how it devalues you, dehumanizes you, and destroys you. That's all the procedures do. Devalue, dehumanize, and destroy. That's the equation of being a transgender identifying person.
If someone had met you, and I'm sure, you were meeting people and maybe they were asking this, I don't know, but let's say a few years into that transition process, let's say you got the first, facial surgery adjustment to try to feminize, and, you've obviously had this initial sex change surgery, again, not changing your sex, but doing this procedure. And if someone had said to you at that time, you're doing this whole thing now, you're Laura, you used to be Walt, you're not married anymore. If someone had said to you, are you happy? Do you feel like you're you now? What would that Walt at that time have said?
Yeah, I don't know. No one ever posed that question. I scared everybody. They didn't know what to say to me because most of the people I ran into had never heard of anybody. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were dealing with. And I think people were afraid to say anything. And so I scared them straight, I guess. They just couldn't say anything. And I had a lot of friends who I believe were trying to help me, but they really didn't know how. And it took a long time for me. I think it was after I wrote a poem and I was posing it to the Lord. It was called Who Am I? And I was in the poem, which got published in Omni magazine many years ago, talked about, I'm reaching out to you. Are you there for me? I need you. My life has been broken and scattered across decades. I need you. Will you please reach down and help me?
How many years into the transition were you?
That was about 7 years.
And did you hear an answer?
I didn't. And I started going, I had my alcohol and drug use, and in just a few weeks, I'll have 39 years clean and sober.
Wow.
And so
that is awesome.
Yeah. So
Congratulations, Walt.
Yeah. So I was working with a Christian psychologist on my fourth step, which you go in and you go through a whole series of things where you do forgiveness to everybody you have blamed for your broken life. And so we spent many hours going through. I had a list.
This is while you were still in transition. You were still Laura.
I had gone back to Walt by now.
Okay.
This was like 1990.
Got it.
And so I was getting sober. I started in 86, so I'd had about 4 years of sobriety. And so I'd written that poem, and I didn't hear anything. That was 88, I believe I wrote the poem. So 2 years later, I'm working on my sobriety, and I'm doing the 4th step, and I'm in an office with a psychologist, and we're going through these things I'd gone through. Many of the things we just talked about, being abused physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And I'd forgiven each one of those people, sort of like emptying the junk out of the trunk. And at that point, I took time to, and that's what the one thing about sobriety, you go through this and you begin to take responsibility for your life and don't blame anybody. And that's what I was cleaning up in the 4th step. So I forgave everybody. I took full responsibility for what happened in my life. And we went outside his office after hours. I had all this stuff written down into the parking lot. And he took a match to the paper that I had all these things written down on. And he lit a match to burn them up. And they burned up and went away. The wind just carried it away. And he said, patted me on the shoulder. He says, come on, now we need to go pray about what happened. And this guy is one of those people who prays forever. And I thought, I've already spent 2.5 hours with you. And it's like, I really don't, I didn't tell him this, but in my head, I'm going,
I'm prayed up. Okay.
I'm prayed up. It's like, we've been, we prayed about all this. I don't know if I want to do this. And he said, we got to pray about it. And I don't know. He said, yeah, come on. So he got me to come back to his office. He sat across from me. We started praying. And I was so tired. I was just listening to him, but I wasn't connecting with the prayer. And he kept praying, and he kept praying, and he kept praying. And I'm going, oh, my gosh, how long is this going to last? And I was starting to feel bad about the fact that I couldn't connect, And all of a sudden, I couldn't hear him. And his voice went silent. And I looked up, and I saw the Lord Jesus. And the Lord Jesus was coming down, and in front of me there was a little baby I could see, and the baby that was there was me. And the Lord was coming down and picked up that baby, held that baby in his arms, turned to me and looked at me and said, you are now safe with me forever. And he disappeared, and the prayer was over. That was the day that I was redeemed and restored to Jesus Christ. And I've never looked back.
Beautiful. Wow. He loves you so much.
Yeah. So I've been serving him ever since. I'm still in his arms today.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. He's done a great work in me and just keeps me going. So I'm thrilled that he came that day in a prayer that I didn't want to have. I was tired and I didn't want to pray. But he came, not because I invited him, because I'd written a poem 2 years earlier, and he just answered the poem 2 years later.
Wow. How many years ago was that, Walt?
Well, 1990.
35.
35 years ago. Yeah. So, and since then, I'm married 28 years, sober 39 years, and been in helping people for over 20 years find their way back to Christ. And if they didn't find their way back to Christ, at least they were able to find their way out of identifying as a person they're not and found their true identity, which is how God made them to function and be, how he made them.
I'm excited to talk to you more about that ministry because it's incredible.
Thank you.
I want to ask you one more question on the timeline here because I think it's very educational for people. You have this amazing encounter with our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Changes you forever. He loves you so much. He loves us so much. Before that, you had this, it was at 8 years in the wilderness, identifying as Laura.
Yeah.
And you, towards the end of that, I'm curious, you're still hurting inside a lot, like you were sharing.
Yeah.
What was it that helped you start to identify again as Walt and leave Laura
There was
behind?
a huge battle inside of me. And so I was literally switching back and forth from Laura to Walt 4 or 5 times a day.
This was the whole time of the 8 years or more towards the end of it?
Toward the end.
Okay.
There was this sort of crescendo of things happening after the poem and after attempting suicide. All kinds of things were happening. I mean, I was struggling. I was trying to fight back, but the enemy was stronger than I was, and I was battling. And so it was this, I'd be going down the road. I'd pull into a gas station and change back to Laura. I'd leave the gas station and go an hour and change again. So I was going through turmoil about who I was. And
is that, excuse me, not to interrupt here, but you mentioned the suicide, the attempt at suicide. Was that during this period? So you attempted suicide while you were going back and forth between the identities?
Yeah.
And was there one suicide attempt?
Two.
There were two suicide attempts. Can you share the circumstances around those?
Yeah, well, the first one was kind of early on in this process, probably less than a year in. I tried to overdose on cocaine, and I really was in bad shape, but the Lord goes, no, not coming home yet. And so the next time was several years later when I was on top of a building getting ready to jump, and they called the police, and the police came and got me down, and they actually took me to jail. But it was after that I wrote the poem, Who Am I?
Got it.
And so from that point on, I was in even greater turmoil, because I think I was really trying to kill Walt and Laura. I didn't want either one of them. I didn't know where I was going. And so, one would come out and the other would come out. And so I ended up going to therapy sometimes 4 times a week. I had people that would made that possible because I couldn't afford it, but there were people around me in the church I was going to that made it possible for me to see a therapist frequently, which probably saved my life. But so going through that and then getting that time with the therapist where the Lord came, then that's when things changed. And then everything was behind me.
The 4 steps you mentioned, going through that process with your, was it a therapist or that was doing that process with you, and you have a sponsor?
Yeah, he was a Christian therapist.
What was what you described earlier was incredible, this process of, the forgiveness and prayer, and then this encounter with Jesus Christ. What would you say were the 2 or 3 things that you did in therapy during that period that helped you break free from this false identity of Laura, and that helped you heal that emotional, psychological, sexual abuse that you had endured? Yeah,
definitely stopped blaming people and realizing that you're the only one responsible for what's going on. If you want to see the person that's causing you the biggest problem in your life, look in the mirror and you'll find him, because it's nobody else but the one you're looking at. And I learned that in therapy, and I learned that from AA. And so I can only change myself. I can't change other people. And if I'm going to find my way out of this, I need to work on myself, not other people. And so when I did that day, I didn't realize that he'd been preparing me for 2 years since I wrote the poem for that day.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of stuff that I went through. And in that process, again, I think it's instructive for us to hear. It took me 2 years, right?
2 years of therapy.
Well, 2 years of recognizing that I needed it. It wasn't 2 years of therapy. I was probably in therapy longer than that, actually. But there was a much deeper, intense therapy toward the end when the Lord came. But I was giving up alcohol, right? I mean, I didn't have my crutch. I didn't have drugs. I didn't have the numbing anymore. I was just facing life head on. And I was now facing life head on with the Lord Jesus Christ as my backbone in my heart and my soul. And that's something that you just can't, there's just nothing better.
There's a kind of therapy, EMDR, that a lot of folks say is very powerful in treating trauma.
Right.
Did you ever use EMDR?
I didn't use EMDR therapy, no.
There's a kind of therapy that it sounds like you effectively did it, supernaturally, God did it with you, of also going back in time and going to the scenarios of the abuse, the events that were so painful, and looking at that child typically that is enduring that abuse and responding with what that child should have been given, as opposed to the abuse that child endured.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was something that you worked on with therapists as part of your process.
Yeah.
And that does take time, right?
Oh,
and that's gut-wrenching work right there.
Yeah. And one session typically doesn't do it, although I've heard people say that one session they've been able to do it.
Wow.
So you just can't underestimate how some people can process it and how some people can do very good with EMDR therapy and other people don't. So I think it's a matter of, if one therapy doesn't work, try another one.
Right. I wanted to ask too about the impact. You mentioned your marriage. You mentioned that separation, the dissolution of that marriage. You also had 2 kids during this time.
Yeah.
How old were they when you started transitioning?
Probably 12 and 15 or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Boy and girl?
Yeah. How
did they receive your transition?
Well, my son, when he was 12, had an interesting response. He said, yeah, I understand what you're trying to do outside, but I know who you are inside.
You're my dad.
Yeah. And so my daughter just shut down, and it really, really hurt her deeply because we were really close, and thankfully we're close today. But I think any father who does this, and I say does this to their children.
Does what? Transitions?
Yeah. I mean,
becomes a woman.
Yeah, you're not becoming a woman. You're destroying your family. You're going to regret it deeply. And if you have a heart and soul, let me tell you, your kids and your wife are a lot more important than you are, or a dress, or putting on makeup, or your little red pumps. Forget it. Your kids are 1,000,000 times more important than anything you could ever do to, look like a woman. Skip it. Selfish. Stop being selfish and realize that your kids need you, and that's who you need to work on, is with your children.
There's a number of personalities, public figures who or biological men, and they transitioned, they're saying they're women, transgender women. They have children. Mm-hmm. And, there's one example is Bruce Jenner, now called Caitlyn Jenner. Yeah. Obviously the father of multiple Jenner children, I think a son and multiple daughters. I think he says, or she says, she says she's she, it's a he, but he says, we have a good relationship. Some of the Kardashian Jenner girls, one of them, I think it was Kylie, was expressing she felt uncomfortable. Like, this is still dad, but now it's mom, but I already have a mom. Yeah. And I think, but the general kind of media story of Bruce Jenner's transition was everyone's okay in the end. There was a little discomfort, but now finally Caitlyn is living her real, identity. Do you buy that narrative?
I think people will, around Jenner learn to cope with it. But, deep down inside, nobody's really talking about how they really feel, right? Because it's not, you're not going to gain any friends by saying, my dad's an idiot and I don't like what he's done and it's really harmed me. I think we need to understand that people are doing things in an effort to try not to create any discord in the family. So I think there's a lot of people making up things. And, if you look at Diane Sawyer's interview with Jenner, he talked about, after going for facial surgery, he paced the floor all night thinking about committing suicide. That's in the Diane Sawyer, Bruce Jenner film. And so I think everybody comes to this precipice where they're struggling. But Jenner is not a female. Sorry. Jenner's still Bruce. Well, he identifies. And I think that's a clear distinction. You can identify as a transgender. You can never become one.
I want to show you a video of one of these sort of public figure / influencers. There's multiple now, figures like, Bruce Jenner, but there's others as well who are kind of Instagram, social media influencers, TikTok influencers, where they're men that transition. And so they're very much, presenting in a feminine way. Several of these people are married to women, have children, and their whole narrative is everybody's happy. I'm my true self now. Look how great we are. I want to get your thoughts on this one. This is a popular TikTok and IG influencer here. Now it says, I see that my life has unfolded just as it was meant to be. And obviously there's this beautiful soundtrack. They take these beautiful images. And, we're playing this for the podcast listeners. For if you're listening on audio right now, there's these like beautiful images. Him and a very cute little boy, sweet little boy, marries this lovely woman, has these beautiful kids. And all of a sudden, bam, he's dressed as a woman, long hair now. And he's saying, we're all so happy now. What do you make of this? I mean, based on your experience and all of the research you've done on this now, the thousands of people you've counseled, what do you make of that?
Well, this is just one chapter. It's not the final chapter. This is where they are at this point. But we don't know if the person's suffering from autogynephilia, if they're suffering from body dysmorphia, if they're doing it just because they make a lot of money off of TikTok. Some of these people are doing it just for the money because they get a lot of money off of it. So I don't have those answers. I just know that if you were to take the time to sit down with the individual and look at their life, you would find out that something happened early in their life that caused them to not like who they are. And if you spend time addressing what that issue is and spend time in resolving what caused them to not like who they are, they wouldn't be doing this. And so, the final chapter is going to be 20 years from now. Tell me what it's like. Tell me what the kids are saying.
He says on his account, my kids are so happy. And he has videos.
That's now.
He films videos of his children, very young children. I think one is maybe 6 years old. Yeah, now it's still I even call mama now, not papa. I mean, and he's putting them on the internet for the whole world to see.
Sorry, this is just way too painful for me because the kids are being traumatized. They're being abused.
The kids of the man who says he's a woman and now he's
those
mom.
Children. This is child abuse. Pure and simple. He's playing a game and destroying kids' identities, destroying kids' lives. He's in it for himself.
It is all about him.
It's all about him. This
His
is
empowerment.
Narcissism. He's narcissistic, and he doesn't really care about what happens to other people, only about what happens to him. Everything is me, 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 nothing about the effects on other people. This, to me, is tragic. It actually makes me ill to see these people do this. They're making a lot of money off of it. One thing you won't find me on TikTok or anything else is because I don't, I just speak the truth. I'm not out for the money.
We were talking earlier about that. It's a nonprofit, and you've counseled thousands of people, given them advice, flew out to meet with them, and you do that for free. It's just out of love.
Absolutely.
You mentioned autogynephilia.
Yeah.
There's someone like, Rachel Levine.
Yeah.
Is the name that he uses now, but was, decorated military leader that was actually given an appointment by President Biden. Famously, however you want to say it. Obviously, we mentioned Bruce Jenner. There are many others. Leah, what's the name? Leah
Thomas.
There's Leah Thomas.
There's, I think, if we can follow Leah Thomas, probably one of the few people with good courage, bad manners, but good courage, came out and said, I'm autogynephilia. Actually put it on a social platform. And I think that's being honest. And I think that's important that this manifests itself.
What is autogynephilia?
Okay. A guy becomes dressed in women's clothing and looks in the mirror, and what he sees in the mirror is the object of his sexual affection. He becomes sexually aroused. They made a movie on it. It was called The Danish Girl. And you can go look at the movie. You can see autogynephilia depicted in The Danish Girl. And it talks about one of the first surgeries that was ever done to, quote, transition a male to a female. And that individual in the story, in the movie, accurately portrayed the person dying from surgery.
From the sex change surgery.
From attempting a sex. Nobody has a sex change, but yeah. So I think, there's, the history. Even Dr. Charles L. Ihlenfeld was at the Harry Benjamin Clinic in the 70s, was the endocrinologist at the clinic, worked there for 6 years administering hormones to over 500 men who were transitioning, quote, that's their word, not mine. And he was speaking to clinicians in Tappan, New York in 79, and he says, I'm going into psychiatry because these people have much deeper psychological issues that need to be addressed, that you're not helping them with giving them hormones, because what I have seen is too much unhappiness, and too many of them end in suicide.
Even after transition.
19 times more likely to die by suicide after you take hormones and have surgery. 19 times higher incidence of suicide after you take hormones and have surgery.
But people say
they lie.
They say you need to take hormones and surgery, otherwise you will commit suicide.
No, it's totally, they flip everything upside down. They say you change genders. Nobody's ever changed genders. Nobody.
So you're saying the research shows that you're 19 times more likely to commit suicide if you are struggling with gender dysphoria and you have the surgery and you have the hormones. It makes you more likely to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's documented. Sweden, they track everybody for over 30 years because it's medicine that they do government-wise. So they have everybody's records. And their records show that the people they helped with hormones and surgery were 19 times more likely to commit suicide, attempt suicide, than the people that didn't have hormones and surgery. Further, the University of Birmingham in the UK did an extensive study in 2004. It was published in the UK Guardian, which is no right-wing magazine. That the headline says, sex change surgeries are ineffective, say researchers. In the third paragraph, it also echoes the fact that the people who've gone through hormones and surgery are traumatized, quote, traumatized to the point of suicide after sex change surgery at some point. So these are not, I'm just telling you what the research is showing. And we know that if they, I've worked with, as I've said, thousands of people, including myself. I have never been counted among the people who had unsuccessful or regretted. I'm not a regretter, according to them. I don't exist. So they don't count regretters to keep the numbers low. I don't know anybody that I've worked with that's ever been counted among the group who had a regrettable outcome. So if you don't count them, you can keep the numbers pretty low.
Have you heard of Jazz Jennings?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a sad story. Follow that. That's a mess. I mean, that speaks for itself. Speaks for itself. Yeah, I mean, that person's life's been destroyed by it. There's nothing good about that. Why would you? Man, that's painful. And the surgeon who did the surgery has done a lot of surgeries and makes $1.3 million a year doing the surgeries. I've had people contact me saying that they did the surgery and it was terrible and want me to help them. So
I think Jazz was how old? I mean, he had a number.
Teens.
He was put on puberty blockers.
Yeah.
I mean, they started cross-dressing him when he was maybe 5 or 6, right? Little boy,
think so. Yeah,
little kid.
See, this is.
And then they did a reality show on him, and he's being cross-dressed. Put the hormone blockers on. They're injecting him in the doctor's office. He's like 11 or 12, I think, and then
sick. They
go in for not like you said, not castration per se, but they call it bottom surgery when he's, I don't know, he was 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah, this is Frankenstein stuff. You're a Frankenstein monster. We're just making Frankensteins.
How many people have reached out to you since you first shared your story?
Yeah,
has it been 30 years now since you first shared?
When I first shared it was probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, I guess. I have no idea.
Publicly, it's been about a couple decades.
Yeah, about 20 years. Yes.
How many people have reached out to you, would you say?
I don't even know.
Thousands?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And thankfully, some of the people who were thinking about doing it saw my story and wrote me and said, I don't even need to talk to you because I just heard what I need to know. I'm not going to do it. And I've had the occasion to talk to people on the phone that were thinking about doing it. And they actually told me, thanks, I think you saved my life.
Wow.
So
I bet there's for everyone that sends you that email, there's many more, I'm going to guess.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my
same
goodness.
thing. You helped persuade them not to do this.
Yeah. I've had that happen where people have run across. I was at an NRB conference in Tennessee, and somebody ran across the room and said, oh, my gosh, you're helping so many people in South Africa. What do you mean? I've never even been there. And they said, oh, yeah, but we use your videos, and it really helps people. So, you know, I just know that this is insane to tell somebody they can change. It's a lie that they can change their gender. They can't do it. If we could, why are we even using the terminology transgender? Because there's people on the left that want you to use it. Because if you use the word transgender, then it sounds like somebody changed their gender. And so that's why they love people who say, I'm a detransitioner, because then it effectively says, oh, we really did change them from male to female or female to male, because now they're detransitioning. I don't even use those terms. To me, there are no detransitioners, there are no transitioners. The people don't have gender dysphoria, and there's no such thing as a transgender. There are people who struggle with their identity, and if we spend time digging into what happened that caused them to not like who they are, we will find out what happened. And you talked about EMDR therapy, and this one of the best examples. I've got a lot of them, but one of the best examples, a guy's 73 years old, and he's writing me, and he says, I have a gender therapist I've been going to for years. At 13, I started identifying as a female. I'm transgender. I transitioned. I did all this stuff. And he said, I looked at your website, and I'm just curious what you have to say. And so I wrote him back, and I said, well, and I did. I wrote him back these exact words. Your therapist is a quack. You've never transitioned. You're not a transgender. And I doubt that you have gender dysphoria. If you're going to work with me, we're going to find out what really happened. And so he wrote back, and he said, well, that's interesting. What do you want to know? I said, you started to have these feelings when you were 13 years old. Tell me, all I want to know is what happened when you were 13. Tell me what was going on in your life, what your atmosphere of your life in your home, what was it like? He wrote back and said, my mom was a raging alcoholic. She would get a butcher knife and chase my dad around the house trying to murder him about 3 times a week. I wrote him back and said, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, but it sounds like that's trauma, and you need a trauma therapist. And I said, so the next time you go for therapy, tell your gender therapist you need a trauma. This is a true story. Trauma therapist and not a gender therapist. And Walt Heyer told me to tell you that. And she goes, well, I'll find out if Walt Heyer is right or not. I'll test you on the trauma scale. She said, because I'm also a trauma therapist.
The gender specialist was
also a trauma
therapist.
So now I've been collecting $225 a week for years without ever asking any questions.
Did the gender therapist even know about the butcher knife and the mother?
They don't ever ask.
At what point did he actually ask questions about the butcher knife then?
Well, she never asked.
Oh, she never even did. Even
never,
though, so you're saying
they don't ever go there.
Well, what ended up happening with the girl?
Well, so he goes in and she says, "Okay, well, I'll test you and on the ACEs scale, and you're 7 out of 10." He's right. You're very high on the trauma scale. Instead of doing the usual therapy, we're going to do EMDR therapy, which you mentioned, which I don't advocate for any kind of therapy because I don't know. But she said, but it's going to be a longer session. We're going to do EMDR therapy. And so he's writing me back a couple of days later, and he said, usually my sessions were a lot of fun. I enjoyed them, but this was painful. It was hard. It was difficult. But Walt, I want you to know something. Here's his words, not mine. I'm free. 1 session of EMDR therapy, 73 years old, 60 years of history, he's free. 60 years of misery solved in 1 session because I asked, what happened.
Did he go back to his true identity?
Yeah.
Was the gender therapist mad?
I
Where's
don't
my
know.
girl?
I mean, I kept writing him every week, "Are you still okay?"
Wow.
And he'd write back and say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm telling you, I'm free."
Wow.
I did it for an entire month. I said, "I'd like to tell your story." And he got angry. He said, "I'm so angry about this whole thing about where they keep you bound to this whole ideal, this ideology, and you can't get out." And he said, "I just appreciate you telling me.
Wow.
But I want nothing to do with this anymore." I mean, he was angry.
Wow.
And he didn't want anybody to know that he had gone through that for 60 years for nothing.
What has been one of the most surprising inquiries you've gotten from somebody around this issue?
Yeah, probably the most surprising one was recently somebody wrote me they had scheduled the surgery.
Man or woman?
Man. Wife contacted me, and I went through the thing about autogynephilia. She said, "I don't know. He's pretty secretive about his stuff." And so she said, "He wants to talk to you, though." He said, 1% chance, he said, that you have to straighten him out. That's how much a chance he gave me. And so he wrote me, and we went back and forth, and I said, "Have you had any trauma in your life?" And he said, "No, none whatsoever. My life has been fine." He said, "I started wearing women's underwear when I was 4. And he said,
where did he get women's underwear when
from
he
his
was
sister?
4?
And so he said, "I knew I had gender dysphoria from the time I was 4." So he's locked into this. So we went back and forth, and I kept saying, "You sure there wasn't some trauma in your life?" And he said, "No, I'm telling you, there was no trauma." And I just felt like he was so adamant about it that there had to be. And so I said, "Well, is it okay if I write to your wife?" He said, "Yeah," and he agreed to it. So I wrote his wife and said, "Tell me, has he had any trauma in his life?" She goes, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, what was the trauma?" She said, "Well, his mother committed suicide by burning the house down with her in it."
At what age?
He was in his 20s.
Wow.
And it was after that he began this whole idea about changing. Now, here's a guy saying he had no trauma. And when I confronted him about his mom burning in the house, that was wife.
Did she die, the mother?
Oh, yeah. Burned to a crisp. Yeah, done. It was horrible. The whole house burnt to the ground with her in it. But then I come to find out she was a very abusive mom. She screamed and yelled at his wife. They had a bad relationship. There was nothing good about it. There's tons of trauma around that. And Dad ran off with another lady to Canada. I mean, there was just tons of problems, all kinds of adverse childhood stuff. But he couldn't admit that there was something going on that could be treated that would avoid him needing or feeling the need to have hormones and surgery. So he went through with the surgery, denying that he ever had any trauma. And that was just about 3 weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
So, but I contacted him only 4 days. They gave me 4 days before the surgery to pull him out of this, which was...
You didn't have a lot of time.
Didn't have enough time.
What do you think that is, though? Because I think in most children's lives, there's going to be something ambiguous that happens around gender that they might be able to remember. Because little kids, a boy will pick up a doll. Mm-hmm. You put on your big sister or brother's clothing. You're the little kid, and maybe it's the opposite gender. It's the big sister's underwear. So what do you think it is that gives someone like this man, if you could hypothesize, if you're willing to go back in time, and he has this big trauma around his 20s where, his mother kills herself in this horrific way. That's when it sounds like, if I'm really reading the timeline right that you're sharing, that's when he starts to wonder about his childhood. Am I really trans? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are real clear about people. There's people who have tremendous resilience, can take anything, and it doesn't affect them. They just blow through things because they have tremendous resilience. There's other people that have very small amount of resilience, and they're the ones that fall prey to these ideologies. And because of things that happened, their resilience has been weakened. And I think in some of these cases, we have to dig into what that is. So I think you have to look at each case, see where their strengths are in their life, where their weaknesses are, Did they have a good, strong relationship with their father? Was their father absent? Was their mom primary? So there's a lot of things to put into the equation. So I don't think you can generalize on it, but I do think that all of these cases really take a great deal of time and exploration into finding out what happened, what was the dynamic. And what I've found is that if you have the opportunity and they give you the opportunity to dig in and spend time with them, you can find out what happened. And
what happened to make them think that they are the other gender?
Yeah, that either reduce their resilience or, some of the cases where a girl became a boy, but she saw the dad beating mom. And she said, I don't want to be the woman who gets beat by a man, so I'll be a man. It's just some simple things like that. My dad's an alcoholic and my mom is not. Okay, I'm going to be like my mom because I don't want to be like my dad. I mean, some of these things are fairly simple, but there's other things that lead up to it. So I think we see in the final analysis, there's things that click at some point because these things transpire over a period of time. There's just a moment where they finally go, I'm kind of done with that.
Do you think that, there's so many cases now, I don't know what the percentages are, you probably do, of young people, very young people thinking they're transgender. It's dramatically ballooned in the last decade.
Yeah, that's because we're telling them they're transgender.
You think it's because we're telling them?
If we stopped today telling kids they're transgender, we would have no transgender kids. We are manufacturing transgender. You don't have a trans kid unless you manufacture one.
Now, the parent would say, usually, the mom who's on TikTok or whatever, whatever. Or it could be very well-intentioned. I'm not trying to disparage everybody or anything, but let's say they say, well, they told me at 3-4 years old, they said, I'm a girl, mom, when they're really a boy.
Yeah. Guess what? You're not. You don't have to affirm anybody. You can tell them, no, you're not.
And I love you as you are.
Yeah. If we spend as much time affirming the kid the way they were designed in the womb, we wouldn't have any of these. Maybe they would struggle, but we don't need to give them hormone blockers. We don't need to do surgery. We don't need to dress them in different clothes. Stop the madness. This is a society that is destroying the next generation, and it is absolutely insane.
I remember what you said earlier about affirmation, how powerful that can be.
Oh, it is so powerful. That's why they want you to affirm people.
In the certain direction.
In a certain
direction. It has to be their direction, of course.
It has to be.
We're both for affirmation, but it's affirmation in the design you're given.
Yeah, in God's design. Affirm them in God's design.
Do you think part of the problem, Walt, could be, I think about gender stereotypes. Boys are tough. Girls like flowers, Yeah. Then there's the tomboy. Then there's the boy who's more maybe interested in things that are more stereotypically feminine, right? And so you take, we had Leonard Sachs on the show, I think last year, and he's a big, doctor, really phenomenal research and work on boys, raising healthy boys, raising healthy girls. Anyways, he was just talking about how, just because a boy likes to do something that's more stereotypically feminine, they're still a boy,
That's right.
Not to say that gender roles don't matter, they do, but we can be so rigid sometimes that we're pushing people away from their own identity, saying that's not who you are because you think you look more like the other sex. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's my take on it. There's nothing wrong with a feminine boy and there's nothing wrong with a masculine woman. And we don't need to give the feminine boy hormones and we don't need to give the masculine woman. Let them be. That's who they are. But we don't need to change them. Let them be. That's who they are. We can't change or enhance and make them any better. I believe that people are perfect the way they are. We don't need to give, that's the whole thing. Stop with the hormones, stop with the surgeries. Because the only people who are changing people's bodies and stuff are these gender clinics. If I were the president of the United States, I would close down every gender clinic in the United States. It would be against the law to give somebody hormones and surgery. It's too destructive. My my inbox has been filled up with regrettable outcomes. 19 times more likely to commit suicide. You can go on the Reddit subgroup r/d trans. There's 55,000 people on there who talk about regrettable outcome. 55,000.
There are some incredible stories on there, just devastating.
Yeah. And so, I've been doing this a long time. And I said I would quit the day that they stop harming people. So if you want me to get off the air and stop doing this, then stop harming people because they keep contacting me because you're destroying their life.
Do you regret your surgeries?
Of course. But by the same token, I'm thankful that the Lord came and redeemed my life so that I can serve him and speak into helping other people and get people to realize we don't need to give people hormones and surgery. You're not changing anybody's gender. I've said that probably 15 times, but it seems
it's the
to
truth.
be.
You got to say it again and again.
It seems to be.
The lie is told so many times.
I go nuts when they talk about this transgender person. They're not transgender. A transgender track runner. No, it's a man. Identifying, if we just properly in our media say it's a man identifying as a woman, I'll go with that. It's a woman identifying as a man. That is accurate. Using the word transgender should be completely taken off the map.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who are very, I hope encouraged, but certainly inspired by your boldness in speaking the truth in a world that's just gone increasingly mad on this issue. I do think we're turning a bit of a corner, though, culturally. There's enough pushback to the craziness of the agenda. But there's certainly people who have maybe loved ones who are struggling with gender dysphoria. I want you to particularly give your thoughts on the case of a parent or parents who have a child who thinks that they're the other gender.
Yeah, but they don't have gender dysphoria. That's the other word that is incorrect. They have dysphoria, but it's not about gender.
What do you mean?
Well, dysphoria comes like, I didn't have gender dysphoria. I had dysphoria about who I was. Dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. You don't like who you are. That's not about gender. That's just, I don't like who I am.
So would you say the proper term is identity dysphoria?
I just say it's an identity distress. They have dysphoria, but you don't know what the dysphoria is about until you actually get in and talk to them. And there's a term that's been used called generalized dysphoria. It's written up. You can look it up, generalized dysphoria. But you can disconnect from the word gender and find there is dysphoria, but you'll find that it's not about gender. It's about being sexually abused. It's about being physically. You can have dysphoria about being physically abused. You can have dysphoria about being emotionally abused, but it's not about your gender. The only reason that you use the word gender dysphoria is because they put it in the DSM in 2013, and they explained the reason for putting it in the DSM was so, listen to this, so people did not feel bad about having a disorder. That's the only reason it's in there.
Meaning they gave the gender dysphoria title on it.
So that you didn't feel bad, because prior to that, it was called identity disorder, which would be correct. That was actually correct. They took what was good and changed it to gender dysphoria.
So what you're saying is that they made by making it about gender specifically, they're picking a culprit that they didn't have any right to pick. I'm
saying they went to the wrong place to treat them. That's why there's so many regrettable outcomes. And so the other thing that happens is, if you look at the clinics and all the places, the only way, it's changing, but the only way when it first came out that you could get access to getting hormones and having surgery was if you were diagnosed with what? Gender dysphoria. So if you were diagnosed with, body dysmorphia, you couldn't get hormones and surgery. You absolutely had to be diagnosed. It's a forced diagnosis of gender dysphoria that I have found. I haven't found one person in the thousands of people I've worked with that actually had gender dysphoria.
Really?
No, they don't have
Does anybody have gender dysphoria?
The guy that had gender dysphoria I explained to you that had the EMDR therapy, Was that with his mother chasing somebody around the house with a butcher knife? Is that gender dysphoria?
So does gender dysphoria exist at all in your view?
No.
So anybody who thinks they have that, it's something else, is what you're saying.
I think gender dysphoria is definitely a symptom. And if we look at gender dysphoria as a symptom, that should cue us as people who are trying to help them look for what the real problem is.
With someone like a Bruce Jenner, I don't know if you can theorize or if you want to, but what would you think is going on with someone like him?
Yeah, I think Jenner actually got started in this, and he's such a big advocate, that I don't think even if he has regret, he doesn't see his way out. He boxed himself in. And he said he was heterosexual, but I don't know. I'm not going to try to speculate on Jenner. I think it's a sad story. What I really like is the stories of people who find their way back and who find Jesus Christ.
Like yourself.
Yeah. And so...
do you see a lot of those?
I see them. I don't know about a lot of them. A lot of people find their way back and they find Jesus later. I was just real fortunate that the Lord actually gave me this opportunity to speak out on the issue, and I have a great deal of passion about it. And at 84, I'm just still going, and as long as I have a voice, I'm going to keep trying to save people's lives.
That was going to be my next question. What's your hope for your ministry and for the future?
Yeah, well, I have a new book coming out. It's called Embracing God's Design.
Beautiful.
I've co-written that book with Dr. Jennifer Bowens, who is a trauma therapist. And so we took what I refer to as the street drunk and the trauma therapist and put them together and put the base of the book is on biblical basis and brings the two together and will help churches and help families kind of resolve the underlying issues and find out that it's not gender dysphoria, that it's something else. And if we identify what it is, then we can treat it. If you keep calling it gender dysphoria, you're going to keep giving them hormones and surgery. And that's not right. It's not correct. And that's what you find out afterward, is that when they have a regrettable outcome, they tell me, I didn't have gender dysphoria. Why did they do this to me?
Wow.
And I said, they did it to you because the only way you could get hormones and surgery was be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Because if you have a dissociative disorder or PTSD or bipolar 1 disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, if you have any of those disorders, you can't get hormones and surgery and change your gender. So they have to say you have gender dysphoria. Now, you may have all those other disorders too, but they're going to add that one in so they can give you hormones and surgery.
So it sounds like your message would be to parents who might have a child struggling with this, if they have the, a power, they're still the guardian of that child, to take them to a proper trauma or just a proper therapist that they can trust is not going to push this ideology on their child.
If you see a therapist that has a rainbow flag, don't take them there. If you see a therapist say they're gender affirming, don't take them there. Take them to somebody who doesn't believe that you can change your gender. Somebody who knows how to provide effective, sound therapy for what the underlying problem is. Somebody who's actually going to do a deep dive into their history and find out if this obsessive compulsive, body dysmorphia, bipolar 1 disorder, schizophrenia, you name it. Because I do it. I'm not a therapist. All I do is ask them simple questions. And I ask everybody, what happened that caused you to not like who you are? That's not a difficult question, but it gets them to think. What happened that caused you to not like who you are? And if they're hesitant, I say, why do you want to erase who you are and try to become someone you can never become? Because I don't understand it. I want you to explain it to me. So I make them dig and go back deeper to find out what the issues are. And they begin to do it. And once they do, and then, because I start probing them, were you abused? Were you hit? Were you abandoned? In some cases, the kids moved to a new location and felt, they had built up relationships where they were. They moved them to a new location. They're in a different school. The kids are different. The town is different. They felt uncomfortable. And they got dysphoria about being where they are. And so they wanted to fit into a group, and they picked a trans group to get involved with. But they were never involved before. So the other component we have here is a thing called social contagion. And it's not rapid onset gender dysphoria. That's a total misnomer. It's rapid onset social contagion. And so kids get together. We have 4 or 5 girls going to Planned Parenthood together to get male hormones. And they just hand them out like candy.
I got to share, we haven't released this yet, Walt, but we did an investigation of Planned Parenthood on that topic. You call them up. You say, I think I'm the other gender. They say, come on in.
Yeah.
We'll give you the prescription in 10 minutes. I mean, it's incredible, right? There's no doctors, assessment, psychological evaluation. They will just write you that drug prescription. They will give you the hormones.
10 years ago, I did the same thing with Planned Parenthood. I called them up and said, I'm this and that. Well, come on in. They were doing it 10 years ago.
Wow.
They've been doing it forever.
They now say it's one of their top services.
Yeah, and so
one of their I should say it's one of their fastest growing services.
Planned Parenthood is destroying more people today, including all the other stuff they do. They're a destruction site. If they can't kill the baby, then they're going to destroy their life with hormones. If the kid comes out of the womb, their job, and they feel, I believe, is to try to change their gender. They're there to destroy people. I'm not a fan of Planned Parenthood. I would love to see Trump completely cut off all their funding.
Hasn't happened yet. Needs to happen.
It needs to happen. And I'd if I had a chance to tell them, cut it off. Because they're doing, I get more people, adults and children, going to Planned Parenthood, and they just give them the hormones. It's like a window. You walk up, like, pay window. Here you go.
So the
go
people
down.
emailing you are getting their hormones from Planned Parenthood?
Yeah.
Wow. Young kids too.
Yeah. 18, 19, 20, or 12. It doesn't matter.
This is all very incredibly important to learn about, be aware of. I think virtually everybody at this point is affected by this issue in one way or another in this country. One way or another. What's a success story you can share? Something that you've seen of all these people emailing you, but you shared some earlier, but when you've done some of this initial work to help them see the truth.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of them. Yeah. And it takes, I think it's important also to mention that it sometimes takes 1 or 2 years after they've contacted me for them to go through the process. And many of the people haven't had, top and bottom surgery. They've just taken hormones, and so they can stop the hormones. And many of the people have had, if they're girls, just had top surgery. Most of the women don't have bottom surgery. Very few women ever go through the bottom surgery part. The men, sadly, go through the bottom surgery and then have breast implants. So they're affected in terms of their ability to foster children.
Is any of that reversible for men?
No. And so girls who take male hormones for an extended period of time will be left fertile too. I just talked to an endocrinologist on the phone yesterday who's sending me a report on this, that they're realizing that it's really affecting both male and females, the hormone blockers and hormones. And we're trying to do something about it, the endocrinologist from up in Sacramento.
Surprise.
Yeah.
It's so tragic. And they're told that it doesn't affect their fertility, or it's very unlikely to.
Yeah. They're real good about not being truthful. Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen, Walt, for us to completely change our culture back to sanity on this issue?
Yeah, laws are one thing, but I think getting the truth out and about I'm real strong on changing the language. I don't use gender dysphoria. I say this thing about you're not a transgender, you didn't transition, and you don't have gender dysphoria, and that's where I want to start. Because it's something else. You've been indoctrinated into thinking that that's what it is. But when I work with you and when we find out what the real issue is, we'll find out you were sexually abused by your dad, you're physically abused by somebody. And I've had this happen so many times. And I'm not even, I mean, when I first started doing this, my wife would say, well, you don't know, you're not sure. And I go, okay. And I win this one. And I say, okay, mark that one down. Well, I'm 100%. When I say there's something that happened, I have 100%. I find out what happened if they allow me the time to do it.
Do they always end up agreeing with you? Yes, that had the impact, or sometimes they
yeah. Well, they end up seeing it for themselves. I just say, you just tell me what went on. Let's find out what it was.
It's like you actually took time to care. That's the thing that's so tragic about it. You actually took time to ask the questions, to care about them, to listen. You're listening.
Well, some of it is kind of silly because a mom will, some of the ridiculous ones, a mom said, my son never had any trauma and here he is, he's, quote, transitioning. And I don't know. I said, well.
How old was he, this one?
I think he was in his teens, 14 or 15. And I said, what do you mean he never had any trauma? There had to be something that happened. I'm convinced there's something happened. Either dad left the house, you had a divorce, he was came from foster care. You tell me something happened. Well, he did have cancer and they had to cut his leg off.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, okay.
Oh my goodness.
You see what I'm finding? This is really.
And she said to you, he has no trauma?
Parents do not know what trauma is.
Wow.
They don't know what trauma is. There's little t trauma and there's big T trauma. Trauma is bad stuff. And trauma can include a dad being gone to war, coming back injured from the war, not being available to work with the child. The list is, exhausting. But we need to start understanding and start doing what I do. This is easy for me. I know there's something happened. I know they're not transgender. I know they don't have gender dysphoria. I don't buy into any of that nonsense. And when I spend the time digging, I find it. But if you don't spend the time digging, like the therapist who never asked about what happened at 13 and the kid's watching his mom try to murder dad, that's trauma. But the therapist never addressed that issue, never even asked. They don't care. They don't want to go there. They don't want to know. I do. I don't charge anybody a dime. I don't even ask them to buy my book. I don't put out videos. I just help people try to find out what happened that caused them to not like who they are so that they never get hormones and never have surgery. That's all I want to do. And you know what? You can save a life.
I bet you have.
Oh, I know I have. I've been on doing a conference on video, and the person would come into my ear and say, I just had a lady call in, was listening to you, and she was getting ready to commit suicide until she heard you, and you gave her hope. And she decided not to commit suicide, and she's staying and listening. I was on for 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you look back on all of the work you've done, what are you most proud of?
Probably I'm most proud of my current wife hanging in with me for 28 years.
She's lovely, by the way.
Yeah.
I got to meet her earlier.
I don't have anything that I'm proud of because there's so much more work to do. I mean, we've only started, and I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. I've had my website for over 17 years, and we're not doing enough to help people. I want to do more. I want to sit with Donald Trump in his office and say, Donald, listen to me. Come on, you want some truth? Let's get at it. I want to look him in the eye and tell him what he needs to do, because I don't think he knows.
What does he need to do?
He needs to start shutting down Planned Parenthood. He needs to start closing the clinics. He needs to do a lot more advocating for stopping this. I mean, he's touching around the sports issue, which is all these things are good, but you got to cut the head off the snake, and they should not be allowed. This should be considered socially destructive to society, because it is. Why are we allowing clinics to mutilate children?
And I would say, why are we, like you were saying, it's child abuse, the parent stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my husband and I were living in the East Bay, the Bay Area, you know, not far from where you were living earlier. And I would go to the farmer's market and I saw, you know, a woman, you know, questionable. I don't know if she's butch or she's, you know, identifying as lesbian. I don't know. It's hard to know, right? But, you know, alternative, right? Doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing, but, you know, some things might be interesting there. Little boy again. Sparkle everywhere. We don't even dress girls like this. Like over the top sparkle, nail polish, sparkle shoes, tutu, crazy hair. Some of the hair is dyed blue. Like the child looked like an experiment.
It is.
And the child was looking listless and unhappy, not like a happy kid. The mom or the woman, the person was checked out on the phone. Like, and I just thought, what hell am I looking at?
Yeah.
How are we allowing this? It made me want to call the cops in the middle of this farmer's market to rescue this child. It's like, who is, but it's like, what can we do? Right?
Yeah.
These children are at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And it needs to stop. I mean, I remember watching ABC show many years ago, and a mom, they were filming her because she had a kid that she was sending to school as a girl boy, and mom is combing the boy's hair, and she's talking to the interviewer, and in a crushing moment that should have captured everybody's imagination, or only apparently captured mine, the kid turned to mom and said, "Would you love me if I was a boy?" Mom's dressing him like a girl and sending him to school. And the kid's saying, "Would you love me if I'm a boy?"
What did she say?
She froze. She had nothing to say. She went away from it. No answer.
It's dark.
So, you know, any parent, in my view, who does this needs to go to therapy.
Oh, yeah.
And sorry to say, in some cases, they probably shouldn't have full custody of the child. That's harsh.
It is tough.
But, you know, again, I lived it. It's child abuse. We're not calling it what it is. When I see a mom cross-dressing a boy saying, "I have a trans kid," child abuse. Should ring a big bell.
Yep.
Should stop. It's nonsense. Mom's sick. Something's happening. And I know in some cases, you know, I've worked with divorces where mom is actually using the child's, you know, gender identity to keep the father, who doesn't like the idea because he won't call him by the correct pronouns. Of course, the only correct pronoun, and I want you to hear it first on your podcast, this is it. The correct pronoun is wacko. That's your pronoun for the day. And so, because the father won't use the correct pronouns, mom's going to not allow him to have custody of the child.
Insane.
Right? So these are the
insane.
things, these are gamesmanship. And so I've sat down with kids who the mom says, you know, is trans, and I've worked with the dad and sat with them, and they're not.
I can't have to say this. I've noticed, Walt, that there have been so many. I see a preponderance of women doing this to their children, and it's often women to sons, turning them into girls.
Absolutely.
I don't as much see men doing this to their children.
No.
And I don't see it as much men doing it to, you know, a focus as much on turning the girl into a boy.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Do you notice that in the thousands of correspondences you get?
But I've also
it's like
noticed,
a particular sickness that these women are transing their sons.
Yeah, and you got to dig into what's going on in their life too, because there's something wrong.
It's dark.
It's dark. It's bad.
It's like they're trying to get. I mean, there's that. What is that? That condition that parents can have where they over medicalize the kids and it brings them a sense of identity. Munchausen syndrome, right? It's a syndrome. It's that, but for.
Yeah, for this. But I do think some men are transitioning their kids, but they're the gay men.
It's like the men that I saw a decade and a half ago in the restaurant.
Yeah. With
the little boy dressed as a girl, two gay men, one cross-dressing as a woman.
Because this is their world, right? This whole rainbow world, right? I just wish we had more people on board and stop using the language. I would love for the people in media to not ever use the word transgender.
Is there another shorthand word we can use instead?
A man identifying as a woman, or
just man. If it's a man.
Cross-dressing, yeah. I mean, it's a man.
Cross-dressing man. Cross-dressing woman.
Cross-dressing man, cross-dressing woman. You know, we don't need to give praise to the idea that they changed, because they didn't.
Yeah.
I can't be a part of that lie.
I'm incredibly grateful for your work. You're on book 8 now. And it's just incredible to me that people can reach out to you and you respond. That's so amazing that you're serving all these people. You've got a lot of positions right now. You speak, you mentor, you write, you come on shows. Thank you for coming on this one.
Yeah.
Tell everybody about your upcoming book and also where people can find your incredible work.
Yeah, the up and coming book, you can go to the website embracethedesign.com and tap on the Amazon icon and you can see the cover of the book. I co-wrote that with Dr. Jennifer Bowens. I also am working on a full-length feature film called Who Am I?, written off my poem, the title of the movie from the poem. We've been working on a script. I've got one script written and it's out, but we're going to probably do some more scripts and try to get that movie out, which is about an $8 million project.
Amazing.
And so right now we've got about $3,500.
Okay.
So
can we link? Is it a GoFundMe? How do people support that? Is it crowdfunding?
Yeah, we're doing crowdfunding.
Okay.
And so
we'll put in the link. You can support Walt's amazing work.
Who Am I? The movie, whoami.com.
Amazing.
So we have a lot of things going. We're trying to catch them from every angle, but I think if I can sit down with Donald Trump in the White House, I can do a whole lot more in one day than I have in the last 17 years.
You've done a lot in the last 17 years. Don't undersell that. Thank you, Walt.
Seriously,
pleasure. It's a pleasure and honor to talk to you, truly. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your willingness to share such a personal, some of these toughest moments. It has helped so many people already. And I know it's, like you said, you're just getting started. Yeah. Well, it's all because of the Lord Jesus Christ came to redeem my life. Not because I'm good. It's because God is good. Amen. God is so good. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Lila Rose Show. It was incredible to sit down with Walt. He's just doing an amazing work out in the world. You can go find some more content that we just filmed with Walt over at rosereport.supercast.com, where we do a special Ask Him Anything segment with questions in that were really fun. I hope you enjoy that. That's over at rosereport.supercast.com. And a huge thank you to EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network, which is the largest religious broadcaster in the world. You can get access to Lila Rose Show episodes 24 hours in advance at EWTN.com/on-demand. And a big thank you to EWTN and their incredible mission to bring souls to Jesus.